Welcome, Naomi Roht-Arriaza. We're very pleased that you're able to do this interview about the genocide trial in Guatemala from Guatemala. I'd like to begin by asking, what is your sense of the mood of the trial as it likely nears its conclusion?
Well, it's a difficult question because there are several moods. There are the people who have come from the communities who have sat there every day, who have been very patient, who have been very, one of them said, General Rios Montt never looks at anybody. I'm really upset about that. He doesn't seem to be paying attention to what they're saying. So there's those folks. There's the people who are observing the trial, who are interested in following the kind of procedure and fairness. There's been a lot of pressure from the defense saying that the trial isn't fair. The sense that I've got is that the trial is basically fair. The problem is that the defense is not doing a very good job defending. And I think that part of that has to do with the fact that they never thought this was going to come to trial. And so they really didn't prepare very well. They don't ask questions when they should. They don't know how to ask questions. And so the judge gets impatient with them. And then they complain that the judge is being biased. But I don't see that as bias, but rather just their inability to formulate questions. And I think part of the reason for that is that they never thought this would happen, and that really their strategy is about delay. Their strategy is about trying to get either the Constitutional Court or the sort of political process to halt this thing, rather than trying to actually carry out a juridical defense. So that's another group that sort of has a mood. The mood, as far as you can tell in the press, is very sharply divided. There are some people who are saying this is amazing and a necessary step to reestablish even minimal faith in the justice system. Other people who are saying this is dredging up old wounds and reopening things that had already been closed. Interestingly, and this is the last thing that I'll say, what seems, for the people who are upset about this, what seems to be making them most upset is the genocide charge. Now, there's two charges in the trial. One's a genocide charge, and the other is what's called a crimes against humanity charge, but if you read it, it's actually a war crimes charge. And so there are two things being charged here, genocide and war crimes. Nobody seems to have a problem with admitting that there were war crimes. And I find that really strange because in international law, committing war crimes is a very serious offense. And having the army as an institution be told that its members from top to bottom committed war crimes, it seems to me in some ways is worse than talking about genocide. Nonetheless, it's the genocide charge that has everybody all upset in one way or another.
Well, this is very compelling, and you mentioned that there were Mayan people sitting in the courtroom. There was very riveting testimony by eyewitness survivors of much of what took place in the Ixil region. What about the role of expert witnesses, for example, cultural anthropologists who testified, who bring an outside perspective but also were there?
Mm-hmm. It's been a very interesting prosecution strategy, and so far we've heard mostly the prosecution. The defense witnesses, except for a couple who testified last week, are only coming in now. So most of what I'm saying has to do with the prosecution strategy. And what they've done is try to really pull together, in some ways, a kind of a mosaic of different perspectives on what happened in order to educate the judges, in order to put different kinds of information into the record. So the beginning part of the trial was all the eyewitnesses. And this was extraordinarily compelling testimony with people, breaking down in tears, talking about horrendous things that happened to them and their family. There was very compelling testimony from 10 women who were gang raped repeatedly, mostly either while they were in their village or while they were in military custody. And then the prosecution turned to the experts. And they've had experts on forced displacement, cultural norms, the effect, the psychosocial effect of the things that happen to people, ballistics, maps, statistics. Many of the expert witnesses have come from the U.S. And there have also been witnesses who were eyewitnesses who came from the U.S. Professor Beatriz Mans from UC Berkeley talked about her own experiences in the Ixil region in 1982 and what she saw. Professor Liz Oglesby from Arizona State talked about forced displacement very compellingly. Patrick Ball, who is a statistician, explained to the court how he came up with statistics that showed that it was 8 times more likely that you would be killed by the army in that region during that time period if you were Ixil than if you were not. And he compared those figures to the figures from Rwanda and from certain parts of Bosnia and showed the court that the numbers are actually comparable. And so that was very compelling. There have also been, in addition to the internationals, there have also been Guatemalan experts. So it hasn't just been a case of people coming in from outside. The Guatemalans have been very, very important. Hector Rosada, for instance, who was one of the negotiators of the peace accords and is a well-known political scientist in Guatemala, talked about why he thought there had been genocide and talked about the genesis of the conflict and why it was that the army had ended up identifying the Xiles as a group with the insurgency. So the experts have come at it from a lot of different, both professional and also subject matter kinds of angles. And the idea is to create a kind of a composite picture that the judges can use to figure out what happened here.
Final question. This is the first time that a former head of state has been tried on genocide charges in his home country. What's the significance of this trial in Guatemala right now?
Well, there's several different levels of significance. As a question of the international system for fighting against international crime, this is an important milestone as the international community becomes more and more insistent that it's national courts that need to try these crimes in the first instance, and that the international community has an obligation to help them do so. So we find in the International Criminal Court, for instance, the court statute talks about how national courts basically are the first line here, and it's only where they're unable or unwilling that the court can step in. So this is an example of what a national court trial can look like, with all its strengths and all its weaknesses. In Guatemala, this is an absolutely fundamental step in showing people that the courts actually can work for people who don't have a lot of power and a lot of money. That the judges actually can carry out a fair trial, and that it's worth going to the legal system for trying to figure out how to solve disputes rather than trying to solve them some other way. It's a very painful process. And part of what we're seeing here today is there's a lot of pushback on the painful nature of it. Both from the perspective of the victims who have to dredge up all of these memories that are now 30 years old, but have never completely gone away. But so there's a lot of pain involved in that. There's also a lot of pain involved for the kind of body politic in reopening this issue. But in the end, the idea is that having done so, it will be possible to make sure that it never happens again and to establish a difference between the past, the present, and the future.
Naomi Roht-Arriaza, thank you very much.
You're welcome. Thank you.